Test. Test, test.
I think we're ready to begin. If you can take seats close to the front so you can see the screen, please. So by way of a very brief and incomplete introduction, I will say that about 5 months ago, I went to an online presentation of the Open Communities Alliance that Roy McAlpin tuned me into. And it was called De-Designing Segregation in Connecticut, which I thought was amazing because I grew up in Connecticut and I knew we weren't segregated here because we're Connecticut, we're in the north. Well, guess what, folks? It was a wonderful presentation, very informative, and the director of the Open Communities Alliance spoke briefly, and I was so impressed with her and delighted to find out that our own Suzanne knows her. So without further ado, I will introduce Erin Boggs, who is the director of Open Communities Alliance. We also welcome Taniqua Hughley, I believe we pronounce it, who is the outreach director.
It's great to be here. I think this is the first time I've done an in-person thing, really, since COVID. So this is like really great. And it's especially nice for me because I actually grew up in the Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. And so it is lovely to be here. It was also lovely to be here for a wedding not too long ago. And during that ceremony, I just had a chance to look at this church and how beautiful it is. And you guys have quite a gem here, and it's really wonderful to be back. I wanted to just say, because I read a piece about this morning in the Washington Post. There's an amazing piece about a guy who's famous and whose name I'm now forgetting, which is going to be embarrassing, but he grew up in Virginia and actually went to school at a school that was, after desegregation had been ordered, in a school that was, he's a white guy, in a school that was all black. And so if anyone checks it out, it's really quite a wonderful piece about his experience. And that spoke to me too, because that was something along the lines of my experience growing up in Washington, D.C. I wasn't the only white kid in my school, but it was about 13% white at my graduating class from high school. And that has totally shaped my work and my perspective on the world, and it brought me to all of this, and just sharing that because it's part of what informs this work. And we're going to start off today with Taniqua Hughley, who is our fantastic outreach director, and she's going to get us going on some of this work, and I'll take it over from there.
Thank you. So I'm going to step back and take off my mask because my glasses will fog. But as Erin said, my name is Taniqua Hughley, and I'm the Outreach Director for Open Communities Alliance. I actually drive by this church all the time because I live up the block. I am a neighbor. I'm in the Asylum Hill area. So it's nice to actually come in and meet the members of this church, and we had the opportunity to connect with some of your leadership via Zoom, so it's nice to actually see you all in person, and to meet Reverend D, who is leading an Episcopal church here in Hartford, is a big deal. So thank you for having me. I'm a member of Phillips Metropolitan CME Church in the north end of Hartford, so it's awesome to be doing this work on a Sunday, and it's also a blessing to see churches who are interested in this type of work and willing to do the work. So at the end, Erin and I will host a Q&A session, and we hope that you all have some interest in taking action as a church and as a community. So I look forward to our discussion. So today, we'll talk a little bit about housing segregation in the Hartford County. So this will be the history portion, and then next week you have the opportunity to hear from Erin and one of our colleagues to talk about the impact of housing segregation. So today we're going to give you the background, the lay of the land, and then next week they'll talk about the impact and some things that we can do to help fix this housing issue in the state of Connecticut. So Open Community Alliance, for those who may not know, we're here located in Hartford, but we work throughout the state of Connecticut. And so we work with an urban and a suburban interracial coalition, meaning we don't only serve the cities and we don't only serve the suburban communities. And so our coalition members advocate for not only access to opportunity, but affordable housing development and ensuring that everyone in the state of Connecticut has access to thriving communities. So some folks may not know this, but Connecticut is one of the most segregated states in the nation. We're more segregated than of our states in the South, and so this is shaped by multiple things: zoning, intentional segregation policies, disinvestment. I'm gonna fix this a bit. Disinvestment in our cities, cut off a bit, but disinvestment in our cities such as Hartford, Waterbury, Bridgeport, and New Haven, and then at the end it says history of intentional segregation policies, as I mentioned before, and also the location of subsidized housing. Where is our subsidized housing location? Our subsidized housing, apartments, housing located throughout the state, and so you'll see in our next few slides where subsidized housing is located in the state and how it wasn't by accident, so how segregation is very much intentional. So, as I said, housing segregation is not accidental, and so here we go. So the role of zoning, has anyone heard about zoning within the last year? Has it been a hot topic here in Connecticut? I see some heads nodding. But zoning has always been an issue, not only in Connecticut, but in the US, but particularly within the past 2 years or so, zoning has been a hot topic here in Connecticut. And so Euclid v. Ambler Realty was a case in 1926 where the US Supreme Court endorsed local zoning power to design zoning schemes that designated zones for certain types of buildings in certain areas, right? And so it set the stage for types of land use decisions. It set the stage for exceptionally large lot sizes. So, you know, single family houses can be designated for, I don't know, like the size of a football field or something of that sort, that really created and reinforced segregation, leaving out opportunities for multifamily housing to be built and developed in some of our towns and cities. And so here, this is a source from a comparative critique about the zoning, the Euclidean zoning. And so it says, the highlighted part says, as Judge Weston Haver, who presided over the case, put it in Euclid 1, was heard in district court, the blighting of property values and the congestion of population whenever the colored or certain foreign races invade a residential section are so well known as to be within the judicial cognizance. So meaning that that folks who do not identify as white come into these particular towns, that one, you see the word invasion, but it's also saying that it's okay for it to be a judicial cognizance. Got it. Yes, I will. Got it. Okay. Like this and slow. Got it. I can do that for you. And so racial covenants. Is anyone familiar with what racial covenants are? Okay. Okay. And so I'm going to call on Martha. So what do you said yes, you understand what it is? Wait, no, not Martha then. Suzanne, excuse me. Yeah, exactly. So she talked about a town having a racial covenants, but many of our houses have racial covenants as well, and it's not hidden, but it's a blatant statement that says this house should only occupy these type of people, right? And so in the Supreme Court in 1948, in the Shelley v. Kramer case, stated that covenants were technically not made, stated that the courts could not enforce racial covenants under the 14th Amendment, right? And so racial covenants were technically not made illegal until 1968, not too long ago. And that was under the Fair Housing Act. And so this is an example of a racial covenant. This, and it's probably hard to see, so I'll just read it. But this is right from High Ledge Homes in West Hartford, where it says, no person of any race except the white race shall use or occupy any building on any lot, except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by domestic servants of a different race employed by an owner or a tenant. So it was clear. No person of the white race shall use or occupy this land. This land is for folks who identify as white only. And so, what year was the 1940, right? And so many of us today, if you live in some older houses or you inherited land or a home from your grandparents or your parents, they may actually have a racial covenant in your deed. So one of my friends who's from South Carolina, his family bought a house from he is black. His family purchased a house from a white family, and in their deed it says that they cannot sell or make any renovations to their home without the green light from that white family who they purchased it from, and that's still in their deed today. And so redlining is also one of the things that really shaped what housing segregation looked like. And so starting in the 1930s, local lenders would only give loans to folks who lived in designated low-risk areas. And so most of the redlining, if not all of the redlining maps, look like this. They're rated from A to D, so a low risk to high risk, and it pretty much, in the D areas, the C and D areas were more likely to be areas where immigrants and African American families lived, and those were the areas that were less likely to get loans and less likely to be identified as less worthy areas for folks to get loans in. And so here, speaking of Hartford, in 1976, Hartford was known as the richest city in the world. We were the financial center, the insurance capital, home of Mark Twain, right down the block, right, and Harriet Beecher Stowe. So we were booming and thriving. Unfortunately, that changed over the years. So in 1950, if you can see here, Hartford County was mainly composed of the white population. And you can see over the years, 1980, it started to shift and change, and the percentage of the white population started to decrease, and then here we are in 2010. And so the darker areas are where mainly today, where Black and Latino families are living, and you can see right in the darker orange, so that shows where our poverty is concentrated in the city. So the white population started to leave the center of Hartford and go to our suburban communities, and subsidized housing also started to mainly be placed in the city of Hartford. And so, as you can see, as subsidized housing was consistently placed in the city of Hartford, Black families started to live in the city of Hartford, and really it was kind of a white flight thing, right? So the white folks left city of Hartford and started going to the suburban areas, and the city of Hartford became more concentrated with poverty. And so this slide is actually courtesy of Susan Eaton, who recently wrote a report that we can share the links with you all. And she focused on housing segregation and education. And so here, this was a Hartford Current article titled, "Where Can a Negro Live?" And this was I think this was produced in 1957. There was a state commission survey right after World War II, which found that Black residents in 1957 stated that residents experienced more difficulty in establishing residence in all white neighborhoods from virtually all channels. So they experienced uncooperative real estate agents, they experienced white homeowners who often resorted to violent tactics when they came out to look for homes. They also experienced building and lending institutions unwilling to write mortgages. So again, the enforcement of redlining. And so this was in 1957, and still today, if you ask some folks who live in Hartford what their housing search is like, they will say the same thing. And so The Color of Law is one of our recommended reading resources to really learn about the history of housing segregation in the nation. OCA has built a really good relationship with Richard Rothstein. He also has a really good 17-minute documentary that we can share the link as well with you. And so this book talks about how African Americans were unconstitutionally denied the means and the right to integration in middle class neighborhoods. And again, that is happening today. So segregation and access to opportunity, as I said before, Open Community Alliance really focuses on ensuring that all residents of the state have access to opportunity in all areas in the state of Connecticut. Oh, live stream from the pub. Got it. Okay. So the out of balance report, I gave you all an executive summary, and those who are online, again, we can share the links to all of these resources mentioned so that you can have them as well. So this is an executive summary of our out of balance report, which OCA produced a few years ago, and we really focus on what areas of Connecticut are struggling, what areas of Connecticut are thriving, and we define what opportunity looks like. We also look at the location of government subsidized housing. So this is a useful tool for you to get an idea of opportunity in the state. So I talked a little bit about opportunity, but the impact of opportunity is what allows us to kind of score and define what opportunity looks like in our state. And so we use three factors that help us create an opportunity score. Education, and so we use the school rating and the median income. Employment, so employment access, job growth and unemployment rates, and last but not least, neighborhood. And so that is the crime rates, the poverty rates, and the home ownership rates. And using these three factors, it allows us to come up with an opportunity score. And so with the opportunity scores, we were able to create this map of distribution of opportunity in Connecticut. So our opportunity maps. And so there are 5 levels of opportunity, rating from very low to very high. The darker the orange, that means that the town or the neighborhood is more likely to thrive. So low crime rates, high home ownership rates, low unemployment rates, and great schools. So I don't know. Oh, here we go. So here in Hartford, you can see here some of our surrounding towns, and I'll zoom in on the next slide, but you can see the various levels of opportunity throughout the state. And most of our cities, again, the Bridgeport area, New Haven area, Waterbury area, Hartford area, is more than likely to be very low and low opportunity. So when you map out where people of color live in the state, it goes right hand in hand with where, it goes right hand in hand with where the very low and low opportunity areas are. So the map is pretty much exact. So this is zoomed in a bit. This is Hartford. And you can see within the county, Hartford, most of the people of color are here, which is identified as very low opportunity. Compared, for example, to West Hartford, just 2 blocks away or so. So just a census tract over. So where do we live? 75% of the white population in Connecticut live outside of the very low and low opportunity areas. So they live in the very high and high opportunity areas in the state. And 74% of black households live in low and very low opportunity areas. So the exact opposite. And so 3% of the land area is considered very low, 3% out of the whole state, and almost half of black and Latino families in the state live in that 3% of the state identified as very low. And so I'm going to pass it on to Erin now to talk a little bit about impact of segregation, so she'll give you a teaser for next week. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Taniqua. That was awesome and also really sobering. I always find it sobering when I look at these maps. And please tell me if I need to slow down too. Closer, okay. So we're going to talk about impact now. We'll pick up on that a little bit next week and then move into talking about solutions. So that's where we want to move to, but this is the sort of background work. So the upshot of all of these systems that have promoted segregation combined with other types of discrimination, like employment discrimination, have meant that we have these huge disparities in income and wealth in the United States between Black and Latino families and white families. So in Connecticut, Black and Latino families are earning half or less of what white families are earning on average. And then across the nation, Black and Latino families have about 1/10 of the wealth. So what's in the bank? 1/10 of the wealth, and there are some estimates that are predicting that that is moving more towards 1% of the wealth. So we're going in the wrong direction when it comes to how these policies cumulatively are affecting Black and Latino families relative to white families. But we also see some pathways to a solution, and this is sort of part of the grounding perspective that we bring into this work. There's this amazing economist named Raj Chetty, who is up at Harvard, and what he has been able to do is get access to millions of tax return data and de-identified it, so he doesn't know everybody's tax information, but he's been able to get access to 10 million tax records for low-income families, half of whom are living in high poverty areas, half of whom are living in low poverty areas. And then he's been able to track the life trajectories of the kids in those families over 20 years. And what he has found in tracking this is that for a kid who moved from a high poverty area to a low poverty area before they were 13, they have a greater chance of going to college, and a really high quality college. They earn more, and for girls, they're less likely to be single parents and less likely to be teen mothers. In a companion study that looked at families moving out of public housing, he found that if a kid moved around the age of 8 or younger, that they would earn about $302,000 more over their lifetime relative to a kid who didn't move. And the impact of all these improvements is greater the younger the kid is when the move happens. And I know you're thinking where I'm going with this is everybody needs to move and leave the city, and that's not where I'm going, so just hold that in the back of your head. Another piece of this, and this is sort of the same notion borne out in another context, is in the school context. There's been research, and this was down in Montgomery County, Maryland, where they have what's called scattered site public housing. So that means some of this public housing they're in smaller units, and they're in different parts of the county. So some are in high poverty areas, some are in mixed income communities. And the researcher there, Heather Schwartz, did the same kind of tracking over multiple years and saw that the low-income kids living in public housing in the mixed income communities actually cut the achievement gap in schools in half over a 5 to 7 year period. And the interesting thing about the school system there is, like Connecticut, they use an educational funding formula, which means that schools with more kids who are higher poverty kids, speaking English as a second language, have disabilities, all of those factors mean the school gets more money per pupil. These schools in the mixed income communities didn't get all that money from the educational funding formula. They weren't entitled to it. And yet, the low-income kids who attended those schools did better nonetheless. So it's a better outcome for less money. We know also when we're talking about higher poverty areas, and this isn't all higher poverty areas, but there are many higher poverty areas, especially for families that we're working with here in Hartford, where there are higher levels of crime. And along with that, in addition to poverty itself, there's a level of stress. And that can create all kinds of real struggles for families just on a practical level, but it also, from a medical perspective, can create, and Suzanne knows this, right? Can create all kinds of challenges in the way children's brains develop. And there's a pretty amazing doctor Nathan Fox down at the University of Maryland, who's a neurologist. These are the brains of 2 children, one of whom on the bottom has been exposed to chronic stress. So you can see the neural pathways are very, very different in how they've developed for these 2 kids. The one on the top is a kid who's not been exposed to chronic stress. Now, that said, the resilience of children is amazing. So when we can reshape the environment, we have a really good shot of putting kids back on a good track and helping them succeed. We see this, and you're not going to be able to see this, it's too far away, but what this slide is some maps on our website about health outcomes that try to intersect health and place. So, for example, where the dot is in Hartford, we see an asthma rate of 152 cases per 10,000. If you look over, and it's my neighborhood in Glastonbury, Connecticut, you see a rate of 7.5 per 10,000. So really radical differences. The life expectancy between one census tract in Hartford is 77.5 years. Just up the street in West Hartford, 85.6 years. So really, really big differences that really represent a range of factors, but place has a lot to do with it. So, as I was saying, does this mean everyone has to move? No. What it means is it's really worthwhile to find those solutions that lead to equitable revitalization so that we really can have strong cities, number one. And number two, it's really worthwhile where we know those choices of housing have been cut off, where families who want to make moves have not been able to. We need to ensure that those choices are there, and that's just part of our civil rights laws, right? But that hasn't happened. All right, so housing is really important. In addition to all of the things we've talked about as an impact, another impact of our segregative housing policies, and particularly zoning, is that we don't have enough affordable housing in the state, because whole swaths of the state have been put off limits for affordable housing. And by affordable, I mean small-scale multifamily housing. I mean even starter homeownership homes. I mean condos. Like the whole range of things that can help people get a good and stable home, and then maybe even set the groundwork for homeownership, have been taken off the table for most of the state. And so what that means is Connecticut has the 10th highest housing burden in the country. A family would have to work 96 hours a week in order to afford the average 2-bedroom, working at minimum wage. And of course, that has implications for more than just race and segregation. It creates challenges for single moms, people with disabilities, anybody who is seniors, anyone who might have a lower income is affected by this, and it's hurting the whole state. So we've looked at where subsidized housing is located. When I say subsidized housing, I mean housing that the government is helping to pay for. And so we see the exact same map. We see that those lower opportunity areas are hosting the lion's share of the subsidized housing. This is zeroing in on this. It's very hard to see, I know, in this version, but there are the dots in there are indicating where the subsidized housing is, and it's mostly in this region, mostly in Hartford and New Britain. So generally, about 87% of the subsidized housing in the state, out of 93,000 units, is located in low, very low, and moderate opportunity areas, with almost half located in 3% of the state. Oh, and I should say, those areas, those high and very high opportunity areas, the 13% of the state, or the 13% of where the housing is located, makes up almost 60% of the state. So there's a real disconnect there between what's available and where the housing is. The same thing is true of tenant-based subsidies. These are subsidies that are given to low-income families who get off a waiting list, and only 1 in 4 or 5 families actually gets these things, that help pay the rent. And one of the programs is a federal program, It's called the Housing Choice Voucher Program. But the choice part seems to have been left behind because there are many families who want this choice, but we know that 86% of families using housing choice vouchers are living in moderate low and very low opportunity areas. And that's true of a similar, at a higher level, of a similar program run by the state. Okay, so one thing that's very important to us is what low-income families using government housing assistance actually want. Like we really try to center our work around that. And so we had the opportunity to do a survey in partnership with an organization that runs a housing voucher program. And what we found in that survey is about 45% of the respondents said they would be interested in moving to one of those high or very high opportunity areas. So that means 55% of the families wanted to stay, so that's really important too, but 45% wanted to go. And in other places around the country, one of the things that really affects this kind of decision making is full information. So was there an opportunity to sit down with the family, sort of say, okay, here are some options. A lot of the families we work with who have vouchers cross some of these higher opportunity towns off the list because they assume that they're not going to be able to live there. It's not that they might not want to, it's that they assume that they can, and often they're right because it's so expensive and they experience discrimination, housing discrimination when they try to access those neighborhoods. So these numbers are without that conversation happening. So there are many families, I believe, who would, in that 55%, who just are like, well, I'm not going to bother. There's some who are like, I'm not going to bother because I know I don't want to live there. But then there's some who, with a conversation, might actually have a different opinion. And you can't see this either. I'm sorry it's so far away. But what we asked the families is, if you can't move, or why would you want to move? Why do you want to move to a higher opportunity area? The number one reason was a fear for personal safety, wanting to live in a safer community. The number two reason was an interest in accessing higher performing schools for kids. I mean, that makes total sense, right? I mean, of course. And then for the families who wanted to move but couldn't, the number one reason was that there were not affordable units. And that was true for 66% of the families. The number two reason, which we thought actually would be true for more people, was lack of access to public transportation. That was only true for a third of the families, meaning there's a huge number of families who have vouchers who would be able to make these kinds of moves if only the housing were available. And what I firmly believe is if those moves can happen, the demand for public transportation would follow. So that's important, but we can't use public transportation, which has its own racialized past. Look at where public transportation is, right? We can't use that to limit where affordable housing is being prioritized. So that's what we have as our presentation. Taniqua put together a great collection of readings. Color of Law, which she referenced earlier. Race for Profit is really dense, but it's fantastic in terms of connecting how all of this housing stuff connects to actually some profit motive that is driving what we look like now. American Apartheid is just the quintessential Bible for folks who are in our field. And then there are a few reports from OCA, Steady Habit of Segregation, which is really focused on the Hartford region, the Out of Balance report, and then from Jack Doherty, and I should say we steal a lot from Jack Doherty, who's a professor at Trinity, for this presentation. He did some of that great research on racial covenants and redlining. So I need to give credit where credit is due. But I'll stop there, and we'd be happy to answer questions. Do you need the mic? Probably. Do a Phil Donahue.
Thank you. Thank you, Taniqua and Aaron. Thank you very much. Oh, that figure about a black, good. I have never had anyone say that to me before. All right, I'll take it off. All right. And, okay, enough of that. You talked about, early before you went through the different other dynamics of this problem, Aaron, that the black wealth was like 10% of the white, but it was trending toward 1%. And I was wondering if that is because the white is growing so much and the black is staying the same, aggregate black, or if it's declining.
Good question. I think it's a combination. The foreclosure crisis had a devastating effect on Black and Latino families in terms of wealth, in terms of like pulling wealth that had been built up in home ownership out from under them. So that is a very, very big factor. And then I mean, we've all seen it. What's happened to, the stock market during COVID, right? So I think both those things are happening at the same time.
Mine isn't so much a question as it is a statement. I'm a white person, as you look at me. I'm an adopted child, so and I have not looked into my background, so I can be anybody I want to be. But I grew up in a place in West Hartford that was all white. I went to a public elementary school, all white. Private high school, one black student. And yet, I had no idea that this was what I now consider wrong. It was what was considered the way it is. Folks in our neighborhood had service people who came into their home at 7 in the morning and then had to be out of town by a certain time in the afternoon, because I was from West Hartford, and that's where one of the strongest racial covenants was around. And I always didn't understand why weren't they around at the things that the community in that neighborhood did together. Why weren't these folks included? My grandmother had a woman who ironed her sheets. I had no idea that other people's grandmother didn't have somebody who ironed their sheets. I just thought that's the way it is. So when I went to college, I was led by the white teachers in my school to those safe schools. And some of you know me, not all of you know me, but I'm not one to follow that path very often. And I found a school out in Ohio that I really wanted to go to. I got there, and guess what? It was fairly white. And it was Capital University. It was the opposite end of Columbus from Ohio State. Where did I spend my time? Ohio State. Down where folks believed the things that I believed, who wanted to work for the things that I wanted to believe, and strangely enough, was kicked in the pants by the people at the evangelical church that I attended to diversify and to get out to see the people in the neighborhood, to do those things. And Trinity Church, where baptized, confirmed, married, has come from here to here as far as our interest in promoting what's right in the world. We haven't done it. We have promoted, and we're working on all of this, and it's just amazing that my whole life, till 19 years old, I had no idea that how the other half lived, all right? And then I ended up with someone who was going to tell me exactly how the other half lives, show me, and then teach me why, which is the important thing. And as I see my nieces and my grandnieces and nephews coming up, to see the difference in their education and what they're exposed to is phenomenal. They're not growing up in West Hartford, but they're growing up in metropolitan areas, D.C., Durham, North Carolina. The other family, I'm not so sure. They're at Sanford. I'm not so sure about that. But just to say, it was like, I had no clue. None. Trinity Church, as a member of the high school group, we raised money for housing units in Hartford to get playground equipment, that kind of stuff. So we were working on it. We've had, and we just talked about immigrants, we've had immigrants in this church since I was in Sunday school. You know, some of my best friends were from the Philippines growing up, and then ended up with a wife from the Philippines, so, you know. But this is wonderful. And you're not preaching to the choir, because not all of us gets the small intricacies about 2 blocks from here. I can go and buy good produce at the grocery store that I cannot find anywhere in Hartford in a bodega. It's amazing.
Well, and I think that really speaks to how much work we have to do here, right? Because I think your experience is not singular. I think that's true of many, 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 many people. And that was, for me, coming here, just a surprise. You know, it's something I've learned. I've been here 21 years now, but it's just like, oh yeah, this is a different place and a different experience.
You said they closed down in the housing choice and rental assistance program in Connecticut, or did they close it down, the housing assistance program or the voucher? They still exist?
They still exist, and if the budget that is you know, out there is, yeah, if it gets totally completed, there will be many more in Connecticut. They're going to expand it. Yeah.
Maybe a year from now, or all right. So how do you apply or something like that? Well, so we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Well, yeah, he's asked me how the program works, how to apply, and there's some great resources, so we can definitely talk to you about it. Yep.
For the public who may not know, so he asked, like, do these programs still exist? How do I apply, right? So it goes to show that, you know, some people may not even know that these resources are out there, right, for housing assistance. So they do exist. Usually there's a really long waiting list, to be honest. Some people are on the waiting list for years. And so average 4 to 5 years. And in some cases, some families' applications are expedited if there's a disability or domestic violence. However, that's not, you know, the case. That's just like a unicorn story. But how do you apply is you get on the waiting list, and then they reach out to you. You have to go through a whole interview process, application process as well. But it's out there. It's hard to find. So it's not a silly question. It was a legit question, because some folks, they don't know.
And actually, 211 has a website, a part on their website that will tell you the sites, the housing authorities that have open waiting lists. So, and you can get on a email list and get emails about it whenever they come open. So it's pretty cool.
You mentioned transportation, and it seems to me there's been a lot of talk about the intentionality of road building in this state to separate the poorer communities from the more affluent. Could you speak a little bit to that? I'm from out of state, and I am completely perplexed by the interchange between 91 and 84. And I'm wondering specifically if there was intentionality in that, or if it was just thrown together.
I mean, there is an incredible history that really connects efforts to what's called urban renewal. So, you know, I think it really was a process. I don't know if it really can date it back to the 50s, but 60s, 70s, to, you know, in theory, fix up neighborhoods that were struggling, that are disproportionately Black and Latino, that tended to destroy the neighborhoods and dismantle a lot of cultural institutions and communities. And along with that often went this effort in expanding the highways that sort of railroaded over communities that were already there. So these things absolutely go together. I think you can find different levels of intentionality, evidence of that higher, more or less in different places. But I think part of what we see with a lot of this is, the extent to which any community any group is put in by government policies into a particular area and is by design, this is happening and the community is all lower income, you're going to have a level of disempowerment that means that all kinds of other things can happen there that are not going to be a beneficial thing, whether it's not appropriate school resources or putting subsidized housing in again and again and again and again. Like, all of these things become much more challenging when you have poverty concentration. So I think all of those things go together.
When we moved to Connecticut 20 years ago, we followed the good schools in making our housing choices. And I was shocked when we moved in to find out that everybody was white. Because this was not what I had seen in other states around the country. And it was part of the reason, actually, that we ended up choosing this church as our church, because there was a wide variety of color in this church. And we wanted our kids to grow up with that. My question is there any data, do we know if school choice has had any effect at all?
And when you say school choice, do you mean the desegregated programs coming out of Shepherd and O'Neill? Or how school choice affects people?
The first.
Yeah, so Shepherd and O'Neill. Yeah, okay, yeah. So I think probably everyone here is aware of Sheff versus O'Neill, the school desegregation case that resulted in a Hartford region-wide set of magnet schools that my kids went to for sort of the same reason. So we're out in Glastonbury, and I was, stunned and could not fathom my children growing up in an entire world where they did not experience diversity, and so Sheff resulted in that. It also resulted in what's called the Open Choice program, where mostly Hartford parents can opt to send their kids to suburban schools, which has been a great resource for lots of parents, but also has proven very challenging for lots of kids and families as well. It's hard to sort of go back and forth like that. So the upshot is we need to be doing a lot more on this. Half of the school children in Hartford are now going to schools that are considered desegregated under the agreement in that case. But I think that the definition of integrated schools in the case is not high enough. I think it's something like 25%, and forgive me if I'm getting this a little bit wrong, but I think it's something like 25% of the students have to be white to count as integrated, which doesn't reflect the region at all. So I think a lot more needs to happen, but I think what's hard about Sheff is this is about housing, right? This is about people are choosing, it's the way we do schools by town. So one option would be to do a regional school districts, and that's really what the plaintiffs in Sheff wanted to do. That's what they asked for. That the judge wouldn't order it and the legislature wouldn't do it. So we were stuck with the solution that they came up with. And if we're not going to be able to have regional school systems, then what we need to do is deal with our residential segregation. So I think it has made a big difference. I mean, Connecticut is terrible on residential segregation, but when you look at the Hartford region on school integration, it's weirdly better than you would think, and it's because of Chef. So it's not perfect, but we got to support it because it's one of the best things we have for right now. Yeah.
The last thing that I would share, and again, we'll share the links with everyone, but those who may be online, you can look at our maps on our website. They are interactive. You can insert the address. So for example, I don't know, 75 Charter Oak, that's our address, in the search bar, and then it will tell you the opportunity level of that particular address. So you can use our opportunity maps, click around and compare the neighborhoods if you're interested to see. We also have the Health Disparities Map, which Aaron shared. You can do the same thing. Insert the address so you can compare towns and cities. We also, Aaron will talk a little bit about this next week, our Fair Share Map, but then we also have a mobility app. And so the mobility app is mainly for those who have housing vouchers. They can put in the address of an apartment and they can compare their voucher amounts throughout the state. So it allows them to see how much their voucher is worth for a certain address. So I encourage you to go on our website and check out those interactive maps so that you can get a better idea of the difference between census tracts in the state. And so it's not on here, so I'll share it with you, but you can find it on our website, ctoca.org/opportunity_data, and I'll send it in an email. Yeah, no, it's not here. These were produced before our updated maps, but I'll share the link with Martha and Susan so that they can get it out to everyone in attendance. And another thing I will say is if you're interested in, helping OCA advocate for affordable housing and access to, housing for all, join our coalition. On our website, there's a tab that says Take Action, and you can join the coalition there. And so this year, we do have some impactful bills that we're trying to bring to the legislator. But even if you're not interested in that, just helping out with some of the local work such as this is important. If you're interested in informing those in your network, whether it's your colleagues or your neighbors, just contact us, and we're interested in doing conversations such as these, a presentation or just a small sit down. So help us take action. Don't be scared to reach out and ask questions. I think it's really important, I'm gonna say this again, it's just really important for for religious organizations to be a part of this conversation, because oftentimes we're left out, and religious organizations really do start the movement. And I don't know if you all are a part of GIA, but if you, it's the Greater Hartford. Okay, yeah, awesome. So just to see how religious organizations are coming together is quite powerful. So if there are other religious organizations you'd like us to connect to, please feel free to let us know. GIA, so it's the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance. Yes. Yeah, so they've done great things, and they're a great example of how religious organizations are coming together to advocate for change in the state. And so we're here. You all know how to connect with us. And I hope that you all have a great session next week. I'm going to miss out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Same time next week. And I do recommend the website. It's very easy to navigate, and it is filled with information. It's great stuff.